Okay, so we're looking at the four belt era, trying to pinpoint when it started and when the standard for Undisputed became four belts. So we're dealing with the WBC, WBA, IBF, WBO. There's no actual date or event or point that you can get a one-size-fits-all type of answer. But here's some important events of how we got here. When Henry Akinwande, the WBO champion, was set to fight Lennox Lewis, it could have been a unification, but the WBC would not allow Lennox to unify with a WBO champion. Obviously, they believed that the WBO was beneath them. Akinwande had the decision to keep his belt or fight for the higher esteemed WBC belt. So he relinquished his WBO belt to get the fight. Now, it's a contradiction on the WBC's behalf because here in '89 we can see the WBO super middleweight champion Thomas Hearns taking on Sugar Ray Leonard, the WBC super middleweight champion, in a unification. And 4 years later, at Old Trafford, Manchester United's ground, Chris Eubank and Nigel Benn fought for them same two belts, WBO and WBA super middleweight belts. Well, what's the difference between Akinwande, the WBO champion, fighting Lennox Lewis, the WBC champion? The difference was Hearns versus Leonard 2 was a super fight. Akinwande versus Lennox was not. You didn't have none of the promoters or none of the major players in Britain banging their heads to get that fight in Britain, did you? No, and it took place in America. Eubank and Ben, maybe not a super fight in America, but in the UK, oh, definitely. Once again, it's a massive fight, huge fight. Millions of people watched this fight. You know, the likes of Bob Arum was over here trying to negotiate a fight with Michael Nunn, with the winner. Barry Hearn was promoting this bout, but it got a little too heavy for Barry, apparently. So Don King promoted this bout alongside Frank Warren, and he would have had options on the winner. Only the fight ended in a draw and he didn't get no options. But he still ended up working with Nigel Benn alongside Frank Warren. Once again, you're dealing with a huge fight. Done millions and millions of views on television. Showtime in America, they was on it. They broadcasted it in the US. Huge fight. Ben and Eubank over here were like boxing royalty. The fight actually in itself was anticlimactic considering the build-up. Like, it was a tame fight compared to the first one. So let's not get it twisted. If Akinwande was a bigger name, they would have unified against Lennox. The WBO's problem was the level of title holders they had. Whereas the IBF, who introduced themselves to the boxing world a few years back, before the WBO in the 80s, they had a bit of resistance, but they were able to sanction champions like Marvin Hagler, Donald Curry, Aaron Pryor, Larry Holmes from the jump. And you're talking about the world's pound for pound best with them fighters there. So they didn't have the issues that the WBO had settling in. Mike Tyson became Undisputed champion in 1987. The WBO's first heavyweight champion was Francesco Damiani, silver medalist from the 1984 Olympics. He beat Johnny Duploi to win the title in 1989. Now, nobody was calling for a unification between Mike and Francesco Damiani. Nobody. Damiani, he was ranked number 4 by the Ring magazine. The WBO was known as the European belt, really. That's where a lot of the fights took place. And Damiani won the belt from Johnny Duploi from South Africa. And I think Daniel Neto was Argentinian. You can go check it if I'm wrong. These guys weren't ranked by the Ring magazine or the other sanctioning bodies. They weren't ranked contenders. Duploi may have had a ranking at some stage of his career, but in 1989 he weren't no legit contender. Not to fight for a world title of any credibility. But Don King did actually offer Damiani the fight, but Humberto Mancini, his manager, they turned it down. I think they was offered $1 million or so, and they turned it down. And Damiani, ahead on points against Ray Mercer, caught a left hook on his protruding nose and broke it. And Mercer took the title. Mercer defended against Tommy Morrison, who was 28-0. Tommy was knocked out viciously, one of the most vicious knockouts you will ever see in a heavyweight title fight. Now, let me tell you how little credibility the belt had. Ray Mercer wanted to defend the WBO title against Larry Holmes, but the WBO mandated Michael Moorer to fight Ray Mercer. Mercer said, yo, this fight against Holmes is the biggest purse I'm going to earn. So he threw the belt away and fought Larry Holmes. And to hurt the credibility of the belt even further, a 42-year-old Holmes, who 3 years previously was flattened by Mike Tyson in 4 rounds, stopped for the first time in his career, comprehensively schooled the 30-year-old Ray Mercer over 12 rounds with no belt on the line. The belt had no credibility. Michael Moorer won the vacant belt. Now let's not get it twisted. Moorer versus Burt Cooper is a classic. Absolute classic. Right? That was for the vacant WBO title that Mercer vacated. But Michael Moorer gave the belt up. He didn't even make a defense. He gave it up. Why? Because he wanted to be ranked by the other sanctioning bodies. He eventually got a shot against unified heavyweight champion Evander Holyfield and pulled the upset off and won the title. The first southpaw to win the heavyweight title, the world heavyweight title. Second, Chris Bird. Is Alexander Usyk the third? No, Sultan Ibragimov, he was a southpaw, former WBO champion. Usyk the fourth. The belt didn't have a good name in America. You got to understand the environment. 80s, 90s. America ran boxing. They don't run it like they used to run it. They don't have the same monopoly. They've lost control of the heavyweight division, and insurgents are flying in from all regions doing their thing. Tommy Hearns was the first recognizable name to the American public to hold a WBO belt. He won the vacant WBO super middleweight title. That was the first WBO super middleweight title fight. What you have to remember, the IBF super middleweight title was around since 84 with Chung Paul Park and Lyndall Holmes and them guys there. But it was never a popular division. It was never fully ingratiated into boxing. The WBC didn't have their first super middleweight title fight till 1988, where Ray Leonard fought for the vacant belt against Donnie Lalonde. And the WBA didn't have their first one till 87. That's how lightly regarded the super middleweight division was. And to add to that, the reason Tommy took that fight is because both him and Ray Leonard were racing to become the first 5-weight world champion in boxing. Yeah? Ray, he pipped Tommy to the post, but he didn't get the credit that he desired because it was for the inaugural WBC 168-pound title. But Donnie was also the light heavyweight champion of the WBC. And it was almost like they created this belt for Ray to beat Tommy to the 5 belts. And then, to add to the skullduggery, they put 2 belts on the line, and Donnie had to defend his light heavyweight belt at 12 stone and contest for the 168-pound title as well. So, Ray had him heavily disadvantaged. It looked like they made up a belt for Ray to pip Tommy to the post. Ray won by knockout, and he won 2 belts in 2 weight classes in one fight. But Tommy didn't come out with much credit either because the Americans weren't familiar with the WBO belt, and James Kinchin was past his best, and he had Tommy on the deck, and I think it was a split decision. Tommy was nearly knocked out. Great fight though. Kinchin took everything Tommy had, and Tommy could hit, and we found out he tested positive, Kinchin, for lidocaine, a painkilling drug. And on the same bill, Robert Bam Bam Hines from Philly, he tested for the same substance when he took the IBF junior middleweight title from Matthew Hilton, and he was allowed to keep his belt. That was the first time I remember any fighters testing positive for anything in a boxing match. First time. Tommy Hearns and Ray Leonard went on to have a unification, and that ended up a draw. Bob Fitzsimmons won the title in 1897, first Englishman or Brit to win the heavyweight title. And Lennox won it in 92, which is 105 years after. He became the second man. And then Herbie Hyde, he won a belt in 94. But you look at the historical British boxing books and see how much credit they give Herbie for that. Herbie actually won it twice. And then Akinwande won it. I told you already what happened to Akinwande. He relinquished the the strap to get a fight at the more prestigious WBC belt. The only two heavyweights they talk about from Britain from the 90s is Frank Bruno and Lennox Lewis. Bruno did win the WBC title from Oliver McCall in 1995 at Wembley Stadium. That was his fourth attempt to win a title. You didn't see Bruno trying to get Herbie Hyde in the ring. No, he wanted to win an official title, not a WBO title. You know, we spoke about Michael Moorer. Before he won that WBO heavyweight belt, when he was a light heavy, he won the WBO light heavyweight title. But who did he beat? Ramzi Hassan for the vacant belt. Who is that? Who is that? And he made a lot of defenses and scored a lot of knockouts. But the magazines used to talk about the poor quality of opposition that he was facing. One of the best names he met was Leslie Stewart. But Leslie was washed by that time, man. 1989. And he was a good fighter, Leslie Stewart, from Trinidad. He was good. Former champion. So after Moorer gave up the belt, the WBO heavyweight title belt, Tommy Morrison, he came back again. Him and his team, they didn't have no shame about it at all. They knew, because of his complexion, if he got the WBO belt and put a run together, they were just going to count a whole lot of bank. A whole lot of bank. He won the vacant title from George Foreman, which in hindsight was a win that appreciated when Foreman went on to knock out Michael Moorer for the unified title years later. But look at this though. This is how inept they were. Tommy was supposed to fight Mike Williams, who was washed as well at the time, right? And they got this guy, Tom Tomaszek, out of the crowd, literally out of the crowd, to fight Morrison for the heavyweight championship. It says here on BoxRec that Mike Williams wouldn't leave his room. Mike Williams used to be managed by Bill Caton, who managed Tommy Morrison. He wouldn't leave his dressing room for some reason. And Tomaszek came out of the crowd and the WBO sanctioned the bout. This guy was drinking beer. He was drinking beer. He had a record of 35-10. And they took him out the crowd to get a world title shot. Not even a non-title fight. How was he allowed to go in the ring if he was drinking? Maybe they didn't know. Didn't test him or anything. And Tommy went on to lose the belt to Michael Bent. Michael Bent lost to Herbie Hyde. Hyde lost to Riddick Bowe. And what did Riddick Bowe do? Just like Moorer, just like Mercer, he vacated it for better opportunities. And he fought Holyfield for the third time with no belt and knocked him out. This is the credibility the belt had and struggled with all that time. No disrespect to Tommy Morrison. But the real heavyweights, they just really didn't respect the WBO strap. I want to big up Bass the Kid. He reminded us in this dialogue we had on Twitter that the IBF did not recognize the WBO in May 2006, but was doing so by February 2007. You know, there was years IBF boxers based in Japan were not permitted to fight for WBO titles. But if anyone is saying that IBF gave the WBO legitimacy, it's not really true. They've always been used. So when you're trying to pinpoint when the four belt era started, right? You got to look at Bernard Hopkins. He won the unification tournament held by Don King and became undisputed champion by knocking out Felix Trinidad. Great performance by Bernard Hopkins, right? He defended the belt 4 times before fighting Oscar De La Hoya, who had just beaten Felix Stern. Controversially, he didn't win that fight, Oscar, right? Oscar took Felix Stern's WBO 160-pound title. So the fight with Bernard was the first 4-fight undisputed championship. But if Felix Sturm had won that fight, do you think the other sanctioning bodies would have went with it? No, they wouldn't. The reason that fight happened is because of Oscar, not because the WBO were respected. Just like they wouldn't let Henry Akinwande unify with Lennox Lewis. So they would use the belt when it suited them, the sanctioning bodies. At the time, Oscar versus Bernard was a super fight. It was huge purses. I think Oscar earned about 30 million. B-Hop earned 5 million, his biggest purse of his career by far at the time. Bigger than anything he earned in the unification tournament. Lennox Lewis, Winky Wright, Zab Judah, Hopkins. They was all part of that era where they became undisputed champions, winning 3 belts, and didn't need the WBO to confirm their status as undisputed champion. in Wikipedia and in Britannica, they've got Joe Calzaghe listed as an undisputed champion, even though he gave up the IBF belt and went into the fight against Kessler. Kessler had the WBC and WBA straps, and Joe had the WBO belt. Joe gave up the IBF belt rather than defend against his mandatory Stieglitz. He beat Kessler in 2007. But as far as a lot of people in record history are concerned, he was undisputed champion. So what are they going by? The free belt standard? But what free belt standard? Now, because the WBO were more familiar in Britain, the British media bent the rules for the likes of Calzaghe and David Haye. Yeah? Both of them had free sanctioning belts, but both of them had WBO belts, and neither one of them had 4 straps, but they were considered undisputed. Like before the WBO came along, you had Don Curry, you had Marvin Hagler, you had Mike Tyson, WBC, WBA, IBF, undisputed champion, free belt standard. And then when the WBO came into play, that still remained the standard. Guys like Pernell Whitaker, he became undisputed around 1990 at lightweight, and he didn't need the WBO to confirm that undisputed status. Now, to sum up, because we could go on forever, like Hopkins beating De La Hoya to become the first man to hold 4 belts. How important is it to say that's the defining event that set off the 4-belt era? Well, the truth is, he was already undisputed before he won the 4 belts. Nobody was going around screaming he won 4 belts. They were talking about the event of the fight because Oscar did well early, then Hopkins caught him with a body shot, and it was a big fight. You know, and they were still calling people like Zab Judah, who won 3 belts after Bernard won 4, undisputed in America. The 4-belt standard has been driven by the rise in social media. When Hopkins set out to win that tournament, he knew he had to win 3 belts to become undisputed. The 4th belt came along by chance, let's say. That's what happened. And it didn't mean nothing to the media, it didn't really mean nothing to the hardcore boxing fans. As far as American boxing fans and media were concerned, the WBO belt could stay over here in Europe. And at the time, I can't really say I could blame them for thinking that. But the likes of Terence Crawford, Usyk, Josh Taylor, Canelo, Jamal Charlo, and Devin Haney, when they started boxing in the weight classes they became undisputed, they knew they had to win 4 belts. That was the consensus standard that most of us agreed to. So to say it started with Hopkins is revisionist history, not telling an accurate story. You could equally say it started with Terence Crawford. He was the first boxer to win all 4 when he knew he had to win all 4. When there was a consensus standard, he had to win all 4. There is a difference.